Hey everybody, Wayne here. In today's overview and review, I'm taking a look at Flashpoint South China Sea, designed by Harold Buchanan and published by GMT Games. Flashpoint South China Sea also features a full solitaire mode allowing you to play either side, and my review will be done from the solo player perspective. Flashpoint South China Sea is a strategy game that simulates the geopolitical contest that has been and is currently taking place between the United States and China in the disputed regions of the South China Sea. The game is driven primarily by a deck of event cards that you play either for their event or for their operations points. The solitaire opponent uses a combination of the event deck and a solo deck, along with the status of the game board, to determine their actions. With those events and those operations points, you're going to be placing influence cubes around the board. The game itself takes place over 3 campaigns, and during each campaign, you will score VPs along the way. One way is for having the most influence over a specific country and scoring it with a card. Another is having the most economic influence over every country. And the last is having the most phone ops or CRs placed. Don't worry, I'll explain what those acronyms mean later. At the end of the game, the side that has the most positive, that has a positive victory point total wins. Let's do a quick overview. I have a full playthrough for an in-depth look at the game. I'll cover my pros and cons, and then I'll give you my final thoughts. Alright, first off, let's look at the map. You can see you have the game board here, you have the map, the South China Sea in the center, you have the countries of the South China Sea surrounding. China, obviously not in play. However, you can see Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, and the Philippines, along with the smaller islands and shoals that get built up during the game. In the game, like I said before, you're basically placing economic and diplomatic influence using the cards. It's cube driven, as you can see, so you're playing cards. You'll have a certain number of cubes you can place based on an event, based on the operations points, and you're going to want to place them in the color for your side. Depending on what you have going on in the game, depending on the scenario, for instance, you have economics, you can score, so you want to have more cubes in economics. If that's not available, because once a card is scored, it's flipped over, you'd probably be placing in diplomatic. You also have this, like I said, the center area, the phone ops and CRs. Phone op is freedom of navigation operations. So that's, U.S. and allies sailing their navies, their ships through the South China Sea, saying, hey, it's not claimed, it's freedom, you're free to navigate. And then you have CRs, which is Chinese reclamation. That's where the Chinese have been building up air bases and naval bases throughout South China Sea. Now, with the cards, let's take a quick look at them. So we have event cards and solo cards. We'll look at the event cards first. I have 3 of them set out here so you can see different kinds. Very common sense. Blue is basically a US friendly, red is a Chinese friendly, and then there are black, which are the neutral ones. On a card, you have a few different things going on. You're going to have a photograph or historical artwork, or current artwork, I should say, or current photograph. You're going to have the name of the event. You're going to have what that event does. In the top left, you're going to have operations points or operation value. You're going to have a mode, which allows for friendly mode matching. And then you're going to have a country in the bottom left that you can attempt to score. So you, as the human player, when you have an event card, you can go ahead and you can play it for the event, assuming it's a friendly card or a neutral card. You cannot play the enemy cards for their event. And it's going to tell you something. For instance, if the U.S. has the most influence in Vietnam, move 2 Chinese diplomatic influence from Vietnam to available. So if assuming they had some there, assuming the U.S. had more in Vietnam, you go ahead and remove them from diplomatic, place it up in their available box. Or you can use it for the operation points up here. So 2 operations points, you could be doing anything from constructing, or in the case of, say, the United States, placing a phone op cube. You're not constructing anything. The Chinese are constructing. Or you could use it to place influence cubes, or to move cubes from reserve to available, or to conduct political warfare, which will raise that tension track. See the tension track up there as well. When anything is placed in the middle, so having regular influence in the countries, not a huge deal, right? It's part of kind of the geopolitical game, so to speak. However, if you're doing freedom of navigation as the United States, or if you're constructing CRs for the Chinese, that tension track is going to go up. And the higher it gets, the more expensive it is, the higher cost it takes to construct or place cubes in the middle. Finally, in the bottom left, I guess I should say the mode match, just FYI, what that is when you're playing it, you can check the discard pile for the event cards. If there's a friendly mode match, it allows you to basically play that discarded card as opposed to your own in reference to scoring a country. Speaking of which brings us to that. In the bottom left, you can play it for the country that's there, and you can go ahead and score its card. Very simple. Say you're ready to score Vietnam. In this case, you wouldn't want to use the United States, but say you had 4 influence cubes there, 2 in economic, 2 in diplomatic. You could play this to score Vietnam. Go ahead and check the Vietnam scorecard. Compare all cubes in Vietnam and the Paracel Islands. In this case, we're looking at 4 versus 2. Decide with a positive differential, which is obviously United States. 4 minus 2 is 2. Scores that differential as victory points, not exceeding 3. So even if you had 5 more, you're still only going to get a maximum of 3. And once that card is scored, again, it is flipped over. So it can't be scored during that campaign. Now, during human turn, what you're doing, you have a hand of 6 cards at the very beginning, and you're going to play a card. Actually, technically, the solo bot goes first, the solo opponent, but I'll cover them in a second. So they would go first, and then when you get to go, you get to play a card for any of those different things we talked about. And then as soon as that's done, turn goes back over to the solo bot. All right, now I'll just talk about the solo opponent's turn very quickly. So they do not rely on a hand of cards like the human player does. Instead, they have a quick sequence of play you run through. First off, you draw an event card, you flip it over, you're going to check to see if they score on that country. So say you flip this one over and drew it, you would check Brunei's influence. If the solo opponent had more influence, they would go ahead and score it. Then you would check for that friendly mode match. Remember, that's that symbol in the corner here. So say they drew this one and this was the top card in the discard pile. That's what they're checking. They would then see, oh wait, do we score Vietnam? So they have possibility to score up to 2, not 2 per turn, but 2 possibilities. However, the mode match thing is fairly rare in my experience, but it does happen. If none of those score, they're going to go ahead and draw a solo card. They aren't acting anything yet. Basically, they're doing is they're flipping it over and they're getting it ready. So go ahead, you flip over a card, just kind of have it face up showing it. Then they check for that friendly mode match again. If they had not scored a country and there's a friendly mode match, there would be a couple things they would do. For instance, if tension up there on the tension track is not critical, they may remove a phone op or a CR, or if they're not able to do that, so say the tension is critical, you're probably gonna have to remove 2 of your influence off the board. Then they go on the next step. You're gonna go ahead and check that event card that they initially flipped over. They're gonna look to see what the operation value is. If it's 2 or 3, you go ahead and move on to the next step. If it's a 1, then there's gonna be a couple things they're gonna do. Then you keep going. Their turn continues. It doesn't end at this point. So the AI may do multiple things in a turn. Now say that it wasn't a 1, right? So like this, it's a 2. So they continue on. Now you check to see. They're going to look, is the tension critical? If it's critical, they go to the operations, which they're going to then use. They're going to spend those OP or OV points to either place phone ops or CRs or to place influence on the board. But if tension is not critical and the solo card indicates political warfare, resolve PW, political warfare, so it has their flag, whichever side the opponent is, the solo opponent, they're going to attempt a political warfare. Finally, for the operations and placing, you can use this card here for obviously influence and then CR/phone op to give you a list. So, hey, I'm going to be placing CRs. Where do I place them? Start with Spratley, start with Scarborough, then Parasol last. Always keep in mind that generally speaking, when you're placing for the AI, you're going to make sure that scoring cards are open, are face up and available. If it's flipped over, for instance, it says, say you're placing a CR and its first one's Spratley. Spratley's part of Malaysia. If Malaysia's already been scored, you wouldn't place it there then. You would check Scarborough next. I'm not going to run through, obviously, everything. I'm not going to explain anything else when it comes to the solitaire opponent, because I want to get to my pros and cons and then my final thoughts. Again, I have a complete playthrough where I play through a complete solitaire game, US versus the Chinese bot, if you want to see everything in action in detail. The only last thing I want to explain is VP and winning the game or losing. The game's going to start off depending on whether you want to play it easier or harder, depending on which side. You can adjust the victory point track, but assuming it starts, say, at 0. As each campaign goes, right, we mentioned you're scoring countries, you are scoring economics, or you're scoring the CR phone op in the middle. You're gaining victory points. We mentioned before when we looked at Vietnam, right? Say you gain 3 off that. You go up to 3 if you're the US. Well, then say the Chinese score 2, so you lower it down to 1. It kind of will swing back and forth throughout the campaigns. At the very end of the last campaign, you go ahead and turn every card face up, and you're going to then score them in order, which usually has a pretty big swing in the victory points. And then whoever has the most victory points wins. If it's a tie and you're playing against a solo opponent, they're going to win. So they do win ties, so make sure you go ahead and get more than they do. Again, I think that's enough for my overview. Let's go ahead and dive into my pros and cons. All right, time for my pros and cons. As usual, cons first. My first impression of this game is that the theme was strong. Starting with that box cover, then looking at the cards, the event cards, and the scoring cards, all the information on them, the historical photographs, seeing, the names, the countries shown on the board. But the more I played, the more I found myself losing sight of the theme. I lost my focus on the countries themselves and instead just viewed them as different locations for me to place my cubes. By my third or fourth game, I was playing quickly, which, involves basically picking a card from your hand, laying it down, playing it for the event, playing it for the operations points, and then getting some cubes, putting either the blue or red cubes, depending on your side, into the boxes on the board. You score a country, you slide the VP token left or right, then you're on to the next card. There was very little critical thinking about how a certain event impacted that particular country. Again, outside of basically wanting one thing, more of my colored cubes at a location than my opponent. That makes the game system flexible enough to fit different themes. For example, you could just as easily make a game featuring Roman Carthage in the 2nd and 3rd century BC competing in the Mediterranean, while abstracting it to the point that you likely won't walk away with the type of narrative you get from games with rich, heavy themes. You'll just walk away having either won or lost. Second, card order can make or break your game, and for a game that relies on cards and not dice, it makes the game surprisingly luck-driven. Maybe a tad too luck-driven. Now, yes, each card has multiple actions you can take with it. Whether you're talking about the event, you're talking about the OP, you're talking about the match, you're talking about scoring a country. And even the opponent's cards are useful, right? So even, say, if you're playing the US and you get a Chinese card, you're able to use it for its OP value or to score a country. But after playing many games, right? If you're playing this game over and over, I just have a feeling that if I get a bad hand draw at the beginning, during the first campaign, my game is probably decided already. Now, finally, my last con. What's the deal with these player aids? The gameplay information only takes up just part of the card. The rest is blank. You have all this room where you can include more critical information. The game may be simple, but it's not so simple that it can afford to waste this space. Looking at the solo play aid here, I'd love to have seen more information for your solitaire opponent, especially in a couple of the areas that require you to remember what the bot prioritizes. So, it tells you the sequence of play for the bot, great. But if it's a, for example, here, check for friendly mode match, if match, A, B, remove one phone op. Which one do you remove again? What if there's multiple? B, otherwise remove 2 of your influence. Well, what influence should I remove? When and where? Yes, as you play the game, and again, I play the game, many times, I started kind of realizing and figuring out, okay, this is how they want you to figure that particular action out. But it's that way for multiple things. Where are you conducting the political warfare at? Perform operations is probably the worst one. Perform operations and end turn. I mean, that is pretty open-ended, considering that the actual section in the rulebook, in the solo rulebook for performing operations, is something like a full page, 2 pages, something like that. I mean, it's a lot of information. So I really wish that instead of having all this border, all this extra space that, well, kind of looks nice, has no gameplay value, I wish it had been expanded here. All right, enough of my cons, on to my pros. First off, this is a slick production. From the component quality to the game's overall look. And although these cards aren't linen finish, and so they, it lacks that wow factor, that's just one minor complaint in a South China Sea of compliments. The board is bright, but not too bright. Clear, but not too Spartan. Although a map that contains boxes for cubes has the potential to look like a spreadsheet, calling Blitzkrieg World War II in 20 minutes, Flashpoint South China Sea easily avoids that. Also love how clean the cards are. Yes, at first glance, there seems to be a lot of information on them. but literally like one hand, or, AKA campaign, into the game, and I was reading the cards quickly, looking at the event, checking friendly mode match, checking the value in the corner, checking what country is here. It did not take long to learn what all the information that's on a card and how it applies, And like I said, after basically one hand, I was playing the game like an old pro. At least in my mind, I was. My win-loss record against the solitaire opponent may prove otherwise. I digress. Congratulations, Terry Leeds, and everyone else involved in making this a good-looking game that catches the eye, but doesn't lose any functionality. Second, the system is smooth. I mean really smooth. You're presented with a fresh hand of cards at the beginning of each campaign, and starting off, the possibilities seem endless. But very quickly, as you play cards and your opponent takes their actions, you find your choices narrowing dramatically. It's not an unwelcome feeling, however. Instead, it makes you kind of have that good anxiety and want to get everything done as quickly as you can. Should I throw some influence into Vietnam? Now, maybe move some influence from reserve to available. Wait, should I engage in political warfare? Wait, where's the tension track at again? Actually, maybe I should just score this country while I have a chance. But if I play this event, then I wait till next turn, I can score that same country and accrue even more victory points. But if I delay a turn, what will my opponent do? All this is really playing out quickly, efficiently. Again, just plain smooth, baby. Finally, Jason Carr has created a fantastic solitaire system. I found myself challenged every game, and I almost always felt like I had a chance and was rarely frustrated. I was worried when I discovered that the solitaire opponent didn't use a hand of cards like the human player does. I thought the solo game would maybe lose some of that flavor and the potential. I shouldn't have worried. The bot follows that very quick sequence of play that I showed you, and it does an excellent job surprising you with its actions. How you, flip an event card, try to score, check for the friendly mode match. Remember, that's a symbol inside of the card. If you score, you end their turn. If not, you start getting into the solitaire opponent sequence of play, right? You flip a solo card over, and you're working your way down. And some things you may end up doing for the bot, multiple things in one turn, or they may only do one thing and then end their turn. You kind of never really know. And once you play through the solitaire opponent's turn a couple times, it really becomes second nature. Kudos to Jason and anyone else who worked on or assisted him with testing it. It doesn't need to use a hand of cards to make you feel like you are competing against a dynamic opponent. All right, that's it for my pros and cons. Let's go to my final thoughts and end this. The system Harold Buchanan has created with Flashpoint South China Sea is a winner. Although I have no experience with it before now, it is my understanding that the game has been in development for a number of years, and it shows. Now, I'm not referring to how some games are in development for a long time and never cross that developmental finish line, right? They're worked on for years because there are fundamental flaws in their systems. No, this game has sprinted across that developmental finish line and is standing on the podium. Now, it's not a perfect game. The somewhat superfluous theme and that card streakiness, as I mentioned, does pull it back a bit. And at its core, if the thought of playing cards to place cubes turns you off, then this game probably isn't for you. But for the rest of us, those who love games with fast gameplay, simple systems, well-designed solitaire modes, and satisfying gameplay loops, you need to put Flashpoint South China Sea on your wish list. And if you haven't already, go check it out. All right, everyone, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know what you think of my video and of this game in the comments below. And if you've made it this far, please, I would sure appreciate your subscription. Appreciate the thumbs up on the video, as always. And until next time, everybody, later.